Network.
My name is Chris Davison. I'm the head brewer at Wolf's Ridge Brewing. We're in Columbus, Ohio, downtown Columbus, which is a really burgeoning craft brew scene. We've got over 30 breweries in the greater Columbus area now, so we're really excited about how Columbus is exploding with beer. Let's go ahead and get the second beer going, if you guys can. The first one that you had is called Clear Sky Creamsicle. And so one of the things we've been doing a lot of in our tap room, we have 20 of our own house beers on at all times in our tap room, and that's a real struggle from a small 15-barrel brew pub. So one of the things we do to help fill the taps is infuse existing beers. And it kind of began as a necessity, and now it's become just a regular thing that we do. It's highly demanded by a lot of our regulars and some of our most sought-after beers. So Clear Sky is our regular American cream ale, 5%, golden color, just very nice, light and drinkable, and it's become this perfect blank canvas for anything we could imagine doing to this beer. And Clear Sky Creamsicle, I think, is one of the first ones that I did. I did this in a cask at first, and I just threw some orange peel and vanilla bean in the cask, and it turned out so beautiful. We did it several more times in a keg. We haven't bottled it yet, but it's a regular thing. We've done several full batches, 15-barrel batches of it now because it's become so popular, and eventually it probably will wind up in a bottle. So a lot of these beers are kind of going in that direction. We try it out, and it progresses into something that really, takes off more than we could possibly imagine. The second beer that's starting to make its way around is another Clear Sky variant. So we have several of them today. And the second one is Coconut Cream Pie. And I have to give props to one of my co-brewers at Wolf's Ridge for throwing out the idea. We've done several coconut beers at that point in time, and he kind of just said, why don't we throw some coconut in Clear Sky and see what happens? And so again, very simple change to our beer. It's just toasted coconut, unsweetened coconut, and vanilla bean, and all of a sudden it pops and becomes this amazing dessert beer. And one of the things I try to do with these beers is keep it simple, and I want to replicate the flavor memory as best as I can without adding extract or without adding something that doesn't need to be in the beer. So coming up, we have like a breakfast cereal beer. I'm not actually adding cereal to the beer. I don't want to throw a bunch of raw sugar into my beer. I want to replicate that flavor. And so I'm taking unsweetened coconut, and I'm getting the perceived sweetness by adding that vanilla bean. And there's vanilla in, I think, 4 of these 6 beers, and it's kind of the magic ingredient. Real vanilla bean adds body and mouthfeel and perceived sweetness to beers, and it really smooths things over, kind of helps cut the alcohol and bitterness of beers a lot, and it really just kind of rounds out some of these flavors in these more desserty kind of beers like the creamsicle or the cream pie. So hope you enjoy both of these. I'm going to finish off my creamsicle so I can make room for some cream pie myself. Just a little bit of background about Wolf's Ridge. I know we're fairly small and unknown probably to a lot of people, but like I said, we're in downtown Columbus, and the area of Columbus before it was the state capital, it was literally just wilderness in the frontier, and it was known as Wolf's Ridge. And they later relocated the state capital to Columbus, proper as it is now, and the city charter actually says we're going to locate the capital in the area formerly known as Wolf's Ridge. So that's kind of where our name comes from, and so we have that tie to the locale from our name on down. We've got an amazing restaurant and kitchen in our tap room, putting out really awesome food, and they use local ingredients wherever possible. In the beer, it's a little bit tougher to use local ingredients, but I do everything I can. So on the beer side, we're using locally roasted coffee in our beer. We're sourcing our spices from a local purveyor downtown. I'm actually moving towards brewing my first Ohio-grown barley, Ohio malted Vienna lager this winter, so I'm really excited about that. So we're really trying to use local ingredients where possible. Our Imperial Pumpkin Ale, we use locally grown pumpkins that we smoke and put into the beer. So that's something that's important to us. I think the last time I did this cream pie before we bottled it, we just bottled it for the first time a few weeks ago. I had a little cask, and I couldn't fit it on the bars. We had so many casks going during a bottle release, and finally I decided, screw it, I'm just going to pull this cask out and just throw it in the middle of the bar, right in the way of the bartenders. They probably hated me for it, but just kind of threw it over my head and screamed coconut cream pie. Everyone just freaked out and started cheering. This has been really a crowd favorite, and it's such a simple beer, and that's really what I really love about how some of these are built. It's a very simple beer, or simple change to an existing beer, and it creates like a very elevated and unique and different take on that beer. We can probably move on to the third beer, and the third one is Clear Sky Daybreak. So yet another Clear Sky variant, and I hope you guys appreciate just how drastically different all of these cream ale variants are. One of the things I love about using Clear Sky as a base, not only is it a blank canvas, but it's low alcohol. So you can drink a lot of it. You can drink a few pints and go about your day and session through those things. But Daybreak is now our best-selling beer. Excuse me. It's outpaced our Session IPA, our Imperial IPA, that used to be our best-selling beers. It's outpaced the regular cream ale in sales, both in bottle and in draft. It's really an amazing beer. So Daybreak is yet another one. It began as a single keg infusion, and then we put it in bombers, and now it's in 6-packs and draft at all times. But that's just the cream ale with locally roasted coffee from One Line Coffee. I exclusively use their coffee, probably one of the best coffee roasters I've ever come across, definitely in Columbus, if not the nation. They regularly compete nationally on their coffee roasting. We typically only use light roast coffee in this beer, and part of my philosophy in using coffee and beer is you need to pair the proper coffee with the beer. I don't want all of my coffee beers to taste like black, turbid coffee that's been sitting on a burner all day. I don't want it to taste like spent coffee grounds. And so it's a very simple process. Whole bean coffees steeped in the finished product in the bright tank or in the keg. And then we pair the coffee. And especially when you're working with light roast coffee like we are in Daybreak, it's a challenge because when they're extremely light roast, it sometimes no longer smells like coffee as you normally would think coffee smells like. You start getting florals and berry notes and more like lighter like toffee and caramel versus like dark roast and char. And so you have to like find the right coffee to like still make sure it smells like coffee, but that it's unique and delicate. And so that's what I think Daybreak has become. It's got the nuance of smelling a bag of coffee beans versus smelling the spent grounds after you brew a pot. I think that's how it comes across. The vanilla is, again, really kind of smoothing out the beer, adding some mouthfeel and body to that beer, adding that perceived sweetness. And so it kind of comes across like, a cup of iced coffee. That's the midway point. Any questions so far on our process or anything? I think they'll grab you a microphone.
Okay. Yeah, the vanilla is perfect. And I guess my question is, you're doing that in the bright tank as well, where you're just kind of, slicing them open and letting them sit in there for a period of time?
Yeah, our current process is kind of just slicing them vertically right down the middle and just putting them in a bag along with our coffee beans. One of the things I've been trying to do is get a quick turn time on our beers so we can get more beer back into that bright tank or into that fermenter. I don't like tying up my tanks or my kegs for a really long time for a long infusion process, so I kind of up the quantity versus letting it sit for weeks or months, which I've heard of some breweries doing. And maybe it's slightly different end product. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but yeah, we definitely up the vanilla. And this beer usually is a 2 or 3 day contact time, and then it's right back out. Coffee especially can get astringent if it sits in the beer for too long, so we kind of leave it in there to taste, basically. And that may depend on the roast. Sometimes it's so light, we decide, we're going to let it hang out for another day or two to pick up or extract a little bit more of that coffee flavor.
All right. Do you ever get over infusions where you have to back blend with the base beer, or do you just blend the taste and then move out all the spices or the adjuncts?
Yeah, that's a good question. Currently, most of the beers you're having now are things we've done before, so I've got the ratios down, and I usually don't have to back blend, but that's something I'm definitely open to, and that's a really good It's a really good idea, but usually these all begin as like a single keg infusion. So I'm not working in a bright tank at first. I'm just porting the raw cream ale into a keg that's stuffed with vanilla or coffee or the new ingredients, and we'll test it out. And then based on how that tastes, we'll change the ratios a little bit and then scale it up from there. But I'm definitely into blending. I do a lot of blending with our barrel-aged beers. I like blending fresh beer back into the barrel-aged beer to kind of cut that hard alcohol that you may get, and that's a perfect idea to do with these infused beers as well.
Stand up.
You gotta stand up.
Oh, thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. Are you working with a local roaster and worried about where the coffee's coming from in a certain time and roast time and stuff, or is it more? I'm visual. I'm a visual talker, Sean. Or is that something you're thinking about, or is that I know you said like the lighter roast. Does it change? I know we've used coffee before, and it like African coffee for the South American coffee is completely different. And is that something you've issued with?
Yeah, so we've done a lot with coffee beer. Actually, last year I did one of these with our local roaster, One Line Coffee, and we spent an hour talking about how we use coffee in the beer. They're very particular about where their coffee comes from. The name One Line Coffee actually refers to like the one line. They can trace that coffee all the way back to that single origin. They work with small farms, and they put a lot of effort into the exact amount of seconds that they want to roast each bean. So I have full confidence in how they're handling the products, but because of what they're doing, it's like more of a seasonal product. So I'll find a coffee that I really enjoy in Clear Sky Daybreak, and then after 2 or 3 months, they're out of it. And so I have to go back to the drawing board and find another suitable coffee. And sometimes I got a batch or two that aren't quite as robust or potent as the Daybreak that you may have tasted today. And so we go back to the drawing board and find a different roast or a different bean. And it's not necessarily just origin. Sometimes it's like, how darkly they roast that bean. And you may have 2 Colombian coffees, and one smells like caramel in that beer, and the other one smells like more floral and much lighter. So it's really just trial and error. And what I've begun doing, especially when I know coffee is starting to run out at One Line, is I'm blending it. So I used to do just a single coffee in that beer, and now I'm moving towards cutting the existing coffee that I know I love in that beer and adding in 50% of a new coffee. And when I find a blend that works, I know like how to start phasing out the one as they run out at One Line Coffee. So yeah, great question. The fourth beer I think has made its way around. It's called Cinnamon Toast Brunch. And hello, Cinnamon Toast Brunch is I believe our last Clear Sky infusion today. And so basically I kind of describe it as Cinnamon Daybreak. It's the exact same base as Daybreak. It's just coffee and vanilla, but then we add in cinnamon. It's whole cinnamon, and it goes in the bright tank just like everything else, and it kind of completely changes the beer. This is one of the most happy accidents that I did. What the owner said was kind of teasing me about infusing so many beers in our tap room, and he said, well, why don't you infuse Daybreak? And I'm like, well, that's infusing an infusion. Like, it's kind of crazy, and I don't know what I'm going to throw in with coffee and vanilla already. That's already in that beer. And he kind of just was like, well, what about cinnamon? And I'm like, okay, I tried it out, and like it immediately smelled to me like breakfast cereal. I loved Cinnamon Toast Crunch as a kid growing up, and so this kind of smells like the milk left over in your bowl after you ate that cereal. Such like a cool beer, another crowd favorite in our tap room. We've bottled it a handful of times, hoping to do another small run of bottling of this beer next week actually in Bombers in our tap room. So really enjoy how this one turns out.
There we go. So I want to talk about 2 of the beers and tasting like cereal, Chris. Since we're doing flavor memories here too, my staff and I over here have had 2 distinct flavor memories. The first one, I think the first beer was a coconut beer. Yeah. We actually didn't get the coconut at first. We got Count Chocula. I remembered eating Count Chocula. It was just a great experience. It tastes like that. And I don't know if there was any chocolate in that beer. Nothing. And then, of course, this one instantly, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Our producer over there was like, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and stealing bowls of this cereal because I loved it so much. My parents wouldn't let me eat it. So it's like, I used to steal it. One of the things I like about tasting beer, I always tell people, and my mentors told me this, you're never wrong about what you taste. And then the beer geekier we get, right? Beer geeks tell you it's like this style and it's that and this is what you're tasting. But truly your palate is what you taste. And I really like new beer drinkers who think they know nothing about beer. I just tell them, just tell me what you taste. If it's brownies, if it's biscuits, if it's cinnamon toast crunch, like you're never wrong about what you taste. And I think good brewers and good beer judges know that. So this is a unique thing about this flavor memory thing that you're doing, I think. It's really all about what we're sensing.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Count Chocula. I've heard a couple of comments in our tap room, not necessarily about like the chocolate type element, but definitely that there's something else maybe non-coconutty there. And I think that's because we toast the coconut. I tried initially with our coconut beers just throwing raw unsweetened coconut into the beer, and it tastes awesome. And if you're familiar with how raw coconut tastes, it's beautiful, but it's so subtle, it just wasn't quite enough, and most people couldn't pick it up. And weren't happy enough with it. They liked it, but so we decided to toast it. And I've really discovered that toasting a lot of ingredients really helps to pull out the oils and add a nuanced flavor. When we add chilies to beer, we toast our chilies first as well. So I think that toasting process kind of helps maybe lend that additional sweetness and maybe that chocolatey kind of character.
Just raise your hand if anybody has any other questions that they want to ask about the beers. We'll try to keep more in your glass, too. Even if you want to talk about what you taste in it, doesn't have to be a question. I'd be curious what kind of flavor memories people are experiencing.
We can probably move on to the next beer, and as that's going around, there are a few other beers that I've done that I wanted to do for this session, actually, and I wasn't quite confident enough in them yet, and I later tried them out in the tap room and was super happy with how it turned out. So another idea I had was for a beer that tasted like Fruit Loops. And I wanted to use real fruit. And so, again, I'm trying to kind of trick the brain into remembering something, but with like a natural ingredient, without using extract, without adding sugar or straight cereal to the beer. And so, again, very simple, vanilla, orange, and key lime. And I swear to God, it tasted like Fruit Loops. It was such a cool beer. So that's one that I plan to do again in the future. We did one called Key Lime Pie. Again, super simple, key limes and vanilla bean. The key lime beers, if you use real key lime, are a bitch because they're really small. So a lot of peeling to do, but it's definitely worth it in the end. Such an awesome fruit to work with. The next beer that just came around is Dire Wolf Yub Nub. So Dire Wolf is our Russian Imperial Stout, and it's probably the number one beer that we're known for in the beer geek world. And we have a lot of different variants that we do of our Imperial Stout. One of the initial ones that I was going to bring to this session it's called Canis Mexicanus, and that's like our Mexican cake, our Mexican spiced hot chocolate stout. But that's really kind of a drink that I think not that many people are super familiar with. And so I kind of like an additional play off of that cinnamon toast is this Yub Nub beer. And this was a joke beer almost to begin with. There's a bar in Kent, Ohio, and I love this bar. They do a May the 4th Be With You event every year for Star Wars. And they're big fans of our beer, and I'm always happy to create unique new things just for that event. And so I always like the really obscure Star Wars references. So the younger people in the crowd may not even remember this, but the original version of Return of the Jedi, at the very end when the Ewoks sing a song, the song's called Yub Nub. So that's where this comes from. I'm not seeing a lot of nods, so it is a pretty obscure reference, but a couple people get it. The ones that get it appreciate it. But yeah, this is one I sent it up. I didn't even have it in my own tap room. Didn't think much about it. And then like a year later, I decided, you know what, let's put it in our own tap room in Columbus. As soon as I tapped it, people freaked out and really enjoyed this beer. And I think it's going to be the next Dire Wolf variant that we bottle because people have been so happy with this beer. But it's kind of a cool progression using similar ingredients to the Cinnamon Toast Brunch, but now in a different beer. And you're getting similar properties, but it works differently with it. And this is with the absence of vanilla. Definitely going into the fresh Imperial Stout's got a lot of bitterness there, but we got, of course, big coffee notes and that cinnamon. Again, if there's any other questions, let me know. But yeah, just having fun with these beers. I kind of really want to start doing some more themed events. So we're doing these flavor memories. And I want to do some more Star Wars themed events. I actually want to do the movie Aliens themed event. The planet that they land on and the aliens are there, the alien eggs and everything is LV426. So I want to do like a April 26th event and a bunch of aliens themed beers. So I got all these just weird ideas like popping around in my head. I just got to kind of like come to fruition. I'm not really sure like how I'm going to tie that into beer, but it'll just be fun to do.
I have another question, Chris. So sometimes when you're dealing with different ingredients in beer, you can actually create off flavors. Or at least the same flavor that could be an off flavor. Like, so people who use peppers in their beer, like there's a compound that if your beer is being judged, that's an off flavor. Sometimes if it's too peppery in general. Do you have any trouble with this when you're using kind of non-traditional ingredients in your beer? Making sure, I haven't tasted any of them. They all taste like I think what you intended, but I think it's a risky thing that you're doing sometimes. So,
yeah, it's definitely a risk. And that's kind of why we anymore start with a single keg. And a keg of Imperial Stout is still pretty valuable to us, but I'd rather dump a keg than an entire batch of beer. But sometimes the scalability doesn't always work the way you think it would. I've done batches of spiced Imperial Stout that were overblown and we had to blend in fresh beer. And then I've done batches that I thought I'd use the same proportions and it just worked differently. And you got no chili heat from our chili peppers, and I wound up having to stuff more peppers in the top of our bright tank like I was dry hopping, and it was a nightmare. But the beer turned out good. So it is there's an element of risk, and some of these ingredients, they're seasonal. They may be coming from different locations depending on when you source them. Especially when I start toasting things in the oven, it's very difficult to completely replicate that because of time and temperature and where it was in the oven. And we're also a restaurant, so I throw it in there. But maybe when I turn my back, the cooks pull it out because they gotta like put some food in there real quick to fire it. So you are working with that. If you use coffee the wrong way, something I've noticed a lot in coffee beers recently is a distinct green pepper aroma. And sometimes it's mild, but it can come through really strongly, and sometimes it's almost off-putting. And one of the ways I mitigate it, at least when using real peppers in beer, is we use smoked chilies. So I use like smoked anchos and serranos and chipotles versus like fresh habaneros. I know a lot of breweries like to put habanero in their Mexican Imperial Stouts, but you get kind of a distinct vegetal green pepper flavor almost from these fresh peppers. So we use these smoked chilies, toast them, and then they're very dark and nuanced and got a little element of char and licorice and things built into them, which is really fun. Let's go ahead and get the next beer going.
Yeah, on the espresso, are you using whole bean on that just like you are on the city roast, or are you using a cold press?
Yeah, so all of our coffee beers are whole bean steeped. I've done experiments with whole bean, coarsely crushed, finely ground, and even cold brewed coffee added into the beer. And they all work. They all work well in their own way, but I was kind of convinced before even doing the experiment, and then especially after it kind of reconfirmed. The whole bean is much more nuanced to me. It really smells like the bag of beans. And I think the way it's working is when you steep it in that finished beer, you've got alcohol and acidity and CO2 gas and pressure all extracting oils off those beans. And so there's absolutely no need to crush it up. Once you crush it, you're kind of freeing up carbons inside, sugars inside, and sometimes getting flavors you may not want or need. And it can be a much more stronger and distinct coffee character. And if that's what you're looking for, by all means, that works really well. But sometimes you don't need to go that far. And so with espresso or light roast, is whole bean, it works really well for us.
I had a question on the green bell pepper with the coffee beans. It's been an issue. Have you packaged and bottled those beers and seen how long it takes? Is there something you're doing to not have that come across? Because it kind of seems like something that happens a lot to people.
Yeah, that's something I haven't explored a lot. I haven't experienced it a lot with one-line coffee, the coffee that I use. And so I think that's partially attributable to their skill and the coffee that they use. They're also using a lot of really lightly roasted coffee. They just released a medium roast, and they told me it was the first medium roast they've done in 2 years. Their espresso roast, they call it espresso, but on their like scale of light to dark, still skews light on that scale. So I don't know if that has something to do with it or not, but one thing that's very important to me is before actually putting coffee in my beer is I taste that coffee. I have them brew me a cup. I ideally do a pour over, which is a really great way to taste that coffee. Super fresh, get all the nuances out of it. And my favorite time to taste brewed coffee, if it's like poured over or whatever, is maybe about 5 minutes or so after they pour it. And the roasters like it super hot, like right away. But to me, it's so hot it almost burns my palate, and I miss some of the nuance. So after it cools 5 or 10 degrees, you can drink it more freely, and all of a sudden, all the acidity starts coming out. Then you start getting, all of like the little notes of like cherry or the cake or florals or whatever else that may be in there. But it's very important to taste the coffee, and if you've got a good roaster that's willing to work with you, do a cupping with them. And it's kind of hard to describe the process, but in a cupping process, this is how they taste their coffee before they purchase beans from their distributor or wholesaler. They grind it up, pour hot water over it. It steeps like in a small like shot glass basically for a certain amount of time, and all those grounds float to the top and create a crust. And then you take a spoon and you break the crust, and suddenly you smell everything super potent. And then you taste it off the spoon, kind of like you're tasting wine. And they sip it in a certain way, and they tend to spit it out. I just swallow it because I need the caffeine anyways. But it's a really nice way to taste the coffee. So I really recommend tasting that coffee and really delve into it and try different things. But I haven't hit a lot of green pepper with my own beer, but I've definitely seen it a lot in other coffee beers.
All right. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Enjoying that last beer?
I'll briefly describe the last beer, and then we can just open it up free for all for questions. This last one, I saved it for last, not because it's necessarily the most exciting beer, but I didn't really want to destroy your palate in the middle of this thing. This is our smoked Helles lager. It's called Fire und Wasser, and if you want to try the base beer, it's pouring at our booth in the Great Lakes section. So we got a smoked Helles lager, and then I infused into it lavender flowers and fresh fennel. And so it's not fennel seeds, it's fennel roots, like the vegetable. And our cooks cooked it in the beer and brought it just above like boiling. And as soon as it started simmering, they killed the heat, let it steep for about an hour, and then we added it back into the keg and let it sit in there with the fennel and the lavender for about a day, and then brought it back out. So this is a really fun beer. We call the variant of this Link or Patty because it smells like breakfast sausage. This is one of my favorite infusions. It's not for everybody. It's very distinct. It's very smoky. A lot of people hate lavender, but I think it's just a really fun beer. Definitely a very savory and different take than most of the other beers that we've done here.
Chris, I have to admit that I want to hate this beer. It's so like, there's so many things going on, but as soon as you said breakfast sausage, I took another sip, and I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I tasted there, and it tastes fantastic. You have to think, it's hard, I think, sometimes to take a sip of a beer and not expect it just to taste like beer, right? So when something really jumps out like this one, you go, oh, there must be something wrong with it. But as soon as you said that descriptor, I love it. I want another glass.
Yeah, this is just like I said, it's a super fun beer to do. Definitely kind of gets people's head scratching a little bit. And this is where it's really awesome. As Wolf's Ridge, we have a world-class restaurant up front that a lot of brew pubs don't, have access to. But our chefs are classically trained. They really understand food. And so when I'm trying to use a strange ingredient or something I'm unfamiliar with, they steer me in the right direction typically. So the first time I wanted to do this beer a couple of years ago, my instinct was to do lavender fennel, but I wanted fennel seeds. And I asked the chef as he walked by, I said, should I crush these, or will it be okay if I just throw them straight in whole? And he's like, no. If you throw fennel seeds in your beer, it's going to be bitter. It's going to taste like licorice. It's going to be really gross. And they're like, we are using fresh fennel in a salad right now upstairs. Like, let's use that. Let's try that. And so he just like cooked it down, and the rest is kind of history. Like, it just worked out really well, and so it's awesome to rely on those guys. They're the ones who've really recommended toasting the chilies. I did star anise in a beer a couple times, and they even toasted that very lightly just to help draw the oils out of that spice.
Yeah, speaking about your chefs in the restaurant, do you have specific pairings that you'll do for some of these, or do you even have the chef say, "I want to do a dish and I need a great beer that would be a good pair for it"?
That's something that we probably should do a lot more of, but some of these beers are kind of flash in the pan, and their menu is kind of set for the season. It changes seasonally, and so they tend to work with what existing beers we have, or what they know will be around for the season that they can cook into our beer or into their food. So they tend to really like our base smoked beers, like for smoking mussels, and I forget what something they like to use the imperial stout in a lot of the dishes and syrups and things like that. But yeah, we haven't really like made a beer catered to the food necessarily. I think it kind of works in the other direction for us typically. No.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? Of course, you can ask Chris questions. We can wrap it up. You can enjoy your beers, and he'll hang around for anything else that you want to know. Chris, the beer is amazing. You are very good at what you do. I think that probably most of us have tried beers with unique ingredients in them, and it didn't really work, but each one of these worked very well. Round of applause, please, for Chris and sharing his knowledge with us. I also think you're lucky to have a chef that's willing to like guide you through that. I mean, beer is food, so well done. All right, Chris will hang out a little bit if you got any questions. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back with more panels tomorrow.